And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have 4 good brothers. Ha 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 ha. We have the man who's probably a better coach than Matt Nagy, the man who can probably manage better than Stan Bowman, and the man who is currently trying to auction off his team's playoff spot. Good brother Aaron. We have the man who is a man of 1,000 magical girls and is currently thankful that he is not a Dallas Cowboys apologist at this point. Good brother Cure.
Fuck the Cowboys!
How about them Cowboys?
We have the evil eye, the living breathing stack of comics, and the man who is for once only slightly late and slightly gay. Good brother Doku. And last but not least, we have the man who is not to be confused with someone taking you to Flavortown, but he is taking you to Weebtown. Good brother Shades.
Okay, that's a good one. I like that.
Just putting this out there, Shades. If you do a review of if you do a review of any anime that involves cooking, I feel like especially Food Wars, I feel like that joke should be delved into.
Don't know if I'll do Food Wars, but I do think I might be getting. I have another review that I have had saved on the back burner.
Oh, I'll keep an eye out for when that happens. But
Maybe. I'm not sure yet.
Unfortunately,
Anyway.
we are not here to talk about weeb shit. Not this time because we had our talk about quality last week. Now we've got to talk about problems.
Oh boy.
So, in spite of current events, I have a lot of love for comics. I've mentioned this before, but I cut my teeth on reading every comic that I could when Shinders was still around in the Twin Cities. And even after that, I was reading plenty of graphic novels at Barnes and Noble, Borders, and Walden Books, sometimes in the same day. You know, I'd stay at one place for too long until they'd kick me out, and then I'd go to a different spot. They'd just keep rotating for years.
Yeah, sad part is half those bookstores you mentioned don't exist anymore.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. But the point is that I do have a love for comics, and of course I've had a love for Supers RPGs for the longest time. But I have been very well acquainted with the sales problems that are happening, especially, and all the more apropos that we bring this kind of thing up, given how there's been talks that AT&T wants to shed even more dead skin off of DC Comics and do another purge after they just did a purge less than 2 months ago.
No, I wouldn't say a purge, more like taking them out back to the chemical shed and shooting them in the head. They just want to burn the whole thing down, not just a purge.
Give it the old Yeller treatment.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what I find funny about this whole thing is what's been referred to as cape shit when it comes to live action adaptations of comic book characters are in a bigger footprint than they've ever been at any point in history, barring, say, the golden age of comics in the 50s.
Yeah.
And yet, despite this pop culture presence, they're not reading the comics. Now, I do want to put a bit of a caveat. As tempting as it would be to bring up the woke factor when it comes to comics, I would like to ask you guys to not do that for one simple reason. It's too easy.
Yeah.
Low hanging fruit, and there's plenty of other reasons.
Aaron, it's not low hanging fruit. It's on the ground and rotting at this point.
It's
Yeah.
Decat's vine levels of on the ground.
Yeah, it's not. It's yeah. The woke shit's actually a symptom of a big problem, and the problem is the writing is terrible.
Now,
Yeah.
when it comes to this whole idea of using films or the like to get people to read comics, the big reason why this came to mind for me was the announcement of how well Demon Slayer is selling to the point where it is not selling in the millions. It's selling in the tens of millions, and is outselling pretty much all of its top 10 competition according to Oricion combined.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It managed to for years. The top selling manga was One Piece. One Piece has gotten knocked off its pedestal, and that hasn't happened for about what, a decade.
And this is especially considering the fact that One Piece has currently just released their 1,000th chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So for it to still lose to Demon Slayer after that milestone, pretty impressive shit. But yeah, I think I can see some of the reasons why comics can't do the same thing, as we will be getting into tonight.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And of course,
I will want to clarify. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but I do want to clarify my stance on this, because I'm kind of the outsider. I'm the non-comic reader, but I know enough about it to be able to keep up with this. And of course, I have seen at least a good chunk of the MCU movies to know some of this.
Yeah, and obviously you, as much as I have seen that lengthy docu-series that Chuck Sonnenberg did on comics.
Oh yeah, many times.
Yeah.
I've watched that several times. It's so damn good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Not only that, I'm starting to think that with the source material starting to wear thin, I think the cape shit's going to start tapering off. You're starting to see that with Wonder Woman 84.
Oh yeah, the trend is gonna. It was a trend. It was a big trend, but it was eventually going to wear down. I mean, shit like that can't last forever.
A trend that's gone 15 years too long, in my opinion.
Now, for me personally, when it comes to this particular trend, putting aside there is a bit of an interesting story on how the whole thing got started, because the idea of doing this shared universe idea was a very large gamble, to the point that for one, getting the rights back for a few characters was difficult, largely due to the fact that during the Toy Biz era of Marvel, there were some really stupid decisions made when it came to selling off the rights to, I believe it was Captain Marvel and not Captain Marvel, Captain America and one other character to, actually no, it was the Punisher, to Canon Films with an expiration date of never.
Oh boy.
Yeah, the only reason that ended up getting back into Marvel's hands was because of the bankruptcy.
Oh yeah, Toy Biz decided to shit the bed.
And it actually did them a favor in that regard.
Yeah, really.
The bankruptcy was not just on Toy Biz. There was no one thing that caused the bankruptcy issue with Marvel. It was a collection of the speculator market, Ron Perlman being an idiot, and the pissing match that was going on between Perlman, Carl Icahn, the banks, as the judge who was in charge of the whole thing when it came to the bankruptcy case, the trustee that he appointed. and
Who
and
do they appoint? Someone from Bain Capital or something?
we have no. It's not known who the guy was, but the guy who was appointed to keep an eye on the whole situation. There was open hostility in court between him and the judge, as well as the bank syndicate and the representatives for both Ron Perelman, Carl Icahn, and Ike Perlmutter.
So how bad was it? Was it pistols at dawn bad?
It got pretty close to that point. Aaron, I assume you have not seen SF Debris' comprehensive look back on that.
No, I know Marvel. I knew Marvel had a shit show in the '90s, but I never heard any details about that.
Yeah, Aaron, when we're done tonight, I highly insist you go watch Chuck's video series on that. You will learn so fucking much, and you will laugh your ass off at how bad we bitch about the comic book industry today. The 90s were just as bad.
Well, but at least there was some bright spots.
There's always going to be bright spots. 90% of everything is crap.
It's just the problem now is no one can write. Mm-hmm. You probably get like one, maybe two, but that's it.
Now
anyway,
Rudis Hazard points out a few things in the comments, and I do want to highlight what he's said. He said part of it is Diamond's recently ended monopoly on distribution and the Big Two's willingness to profit off of bleeding retailers out, which is definitely true.
That's right.
The other part is a complete and total lack of standards. There's no Marvel method anymore. They don't hire the best anymore. Editors, artists, writers from top down, bad. No more artists touting piles and piles of rejection letters as badges of honor. They're more likely to hire some random blogger for peanuts than some passionate artist from Artist Alley. But yeah, the distribution monopoly is the single biggest factor. During the height of these movies, you should have had books at the checkout in grocery stores and bookstores, which is definitely... when it comes to the whole grocery stores and bookstores thing, this is one of those things where I have to wonder if shifting to, even though it ended up saving a lot of the industry, the shift towards trade paperbacks I think had a cost that nobody was looking into at the time.
Yeah, but the whole grocery store, here's the problem. Who reads print nowadays? Very little. But if there's anything that I've been liking out of the Comicsgate artists, they've sort of started thinking outside the box and thinking of new ways to get their works out. I'm surprised none of the big two hasn't even thought of that yet. But then again, thinking is a bit of a tall order for the big two as of right now.
Aaron, I actually agree with you on that because that is a bigger problem with most major industries. Movies, comic books, even video games to some extent, is the unwillingness to evolve. They're so comfortable with the way things have been up until now that when all this new stuff is coming on that is basically becoming the standard, they're not ready to shift to said standard. A lot of these companies still don't like the idea of working online.
Yeah, and besides, and also let's see here. And the problem is most of especially mainstream EMAX, especially comics, they still work off one concept.
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
Basically.
There's definitely that. Especially since the funny thing is that back in the 90s and now you have the problem of event comics leading into other event comics.
Yes,
and
stupid.
The whole thing with crossovers, which I hope to tackle at a later date. But what I do want to, but even with this pop culture thing, the fact is now is the fact that that it's not transferring over. And when it comes to the whole thing of putting them in grocery stores or bookstores, I know where people are going with the whole who reads these days and stuff like that. But you're ignoring one factor in that. Impulse buying.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
I think actually the argument shouldn't be about that because yeah, you're absolutely right. If the right comics were in the right places, I mean, hell, how do you think the Archie comics are still alive after all these fucking years?
Mm-hmm.
They still put their stuffs on the freaking on the freaking checkout counter.
Yeah.
Now, the real issue comes down to lack of space. It was the whole reason that a lot of these comic companies ended up making individuals or supporting individual comic stores to begin with, is that there are so many different comics coming out and there's only so much space on the checkout counter. You're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they probably could have handled it better, but I can see why they had to do that.
mm-hmm.
Well, there is a bigger fundamental underlying issue to all of this, and it stems from just using Kimetsu no Yaiba or Demon Slayer as an example as to why that manga is now outselling, especially after the release of the Mugen Train movie, compared to Marvel Comics is barely managing to keep its head above water, if that. And it boils down to this. If you go watch Demon Slayer or any other anime that's based off of manga, you're going to get the same story, usually with a little bit more material, because obviously there's anime-only stuff or things get cut out for the sake of brevity. Mm-hmm. Now, if you go and you watch an MCU movie, and then you go to a comic store, not only you're not getting the same story, the characters, especially when it comes to Marvel, aren't even recognizable. You have Nazi Captain America, Jane Foster Thor. A person doesn't just go watch a Marvel movie unless it's like one of the one or two comic books that are like a prequel to the movie itself, the events leading up to said movie. But you don't just go in and buy an issue 1 and expect to get the same type of story. They're completely different, and it's not an easy threshold for new readers to break into, because they not only do they not know where to start, they don't know what story arc is going on. Obviously, there's the issue of event fatigue, and you can't just go in and pick up a comic book after having watched the latest, Thor movie. And that's where the disconnect between the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the DC Extended Universe and the storytelling in the comic universes fails. It's just not gonna sell books because they're two completely different mediums, two completely different stories, often completely different characters. And unless you're a comic nerd like me or Mildra, you're not going to know what the hell is going on, let alone where to start. And most people just throw up their hands and be like, yeah, screw it. I'll buy this because I think my niece or my nephew might like it, and call it a day.
Yeah, that's the
Actually
that's the big problem though, because the problem is with some of the MCU shit. These are stories that was printed 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Well, let's consider this. Now a lot of the Phase 1 MCU stuff was basically origin stories in one form or another. Even though there were certain things that changed with those origin stories, where Tony Stark was when he got fucked up. I think originally he was in Vietnam when he got fucked up instead of in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But when it came to, I'll use Iron Man 2 as my example with that. That's a case of trying to hodgepodge several stories together. First off, they tried and kit bashed together Whiplash and the Crimson Dynamo into one character, while trying to set up the Avenger Initiative or lay seeds for more of it, while at the same time trying to do the Demon in a Bottle storyline.
Oh boy!
Just shifting it away from alcoholism to him dying of palladium poisoning. And then for 3, they tried to integrate AIM and the Extremis storyline in the comics, and the Extremis storyline in the Iron Man comic was meant to be a kind of soft launch for the character.
Here's a prompt. Here's a prompt with the AIM storyline in Iron Man. Why in the blue hell? Because if you talk about AIM, why the hell did they not include MODOK?
The honest answer to the way I see it is that while, yes, they still included a lot of the more fantastical elements of the superhero comics in Marvel, there was still some level of grounded realism to everything. Everything felt like it was somewhat, maybe not fully, but somewhat realistic. And MODOK as a character is just so out there. I mean, look what they did to what was the guy in Iron Man 3? Not the main villain, but the one they touted as
the Mandarin.
Oh,
the Mandarin. Look what they did to the Mandarin. They couldn't make the Mandarin as the way he was presented in the comics because it was basically it was a Chinaman knockoff. It was a Chinaman stereotype, and on top of that, he had all these mystical powers with the rings and everything. You weren't going to translate that into their version of the movies, into the MCU. So they made him a joke. Basically, they made him a fake. Imagine trying. It was a stupid idea. I'm not arguing that for a minute. I'm just saying that's what they were doing because they couldn't make the Mandarin and the Mandarin. So imagine them trying to do that with MODOK.
Yeah.
If you know what MODOK looks like, how the hell do you translate that to the to casual audiences on the big screen the way they were trying to?
Especially since and while some parts would do a kind of some parts of the MCU would later start integrating more fantastical elements. Up until that point, the Iron Man had been straight science fiction. The fantastical stuff was relegated to, say, Thor.
And even with Thor, they didn't go that far with it. They were still, again, it was still somewhat more realistic. There's a reason why they didn't have the Frost Giants be heavily involved because, too long of that and it starts getting too unrealistic for people. Mm-hmm. For us comic book fans, we can handle the crazy shit. For us, that'd be great. But this was meant to be aimed at casual audiences who don't read comics, who aren't into the geeky shit that we are. So they had to bring it down a little bit. It's a dumb thing to do. I'm not going to argue that because I know that's what you guys are thinking. But that's what they had to do in order for it to sell. They had to set it up for a broader audience. And it led to a lot of the problems. And it also leads to the very reason why the comics aren't selling. Because, again, they see characters like the Mandarin and, oh, I'd like to see what this goofy shit is. Sees the comics. What the fuck is this? It's one thing that for us, it's like, why are you making a big deal about it? But to them, it's like, this just is way too much for me.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would say that I realize that that JT and I have the running gag of our conversations always leaning towards Batman eventually, but this is one of those cases where I do have to blame a lot of the expectations with the success of the Batman films over the years, where especially with the Nolan trilogy, where he outright refused to have any fantastical villains, which is ironic given the fact that all three of his movies have some sort of SF MacGuffin.
Yeah, really. Especially Scarecrow. He was like one of the more fantastical of the villains.
Yeah,
Scarecrow's even when I mean fantastical is Nolan did not want what he referred to as sci-fi villains, because he was asked if he would ever put in Mr. Freeze. And
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like it would fit in Nolan's version. And yeah, because of the runaway success of the Nolan trilogy, yeah, you can see where a lot of other studios realized they had to play down their more fantastical elements. Again, dumb for us comic fans, or painful for us comic fans, but it's one of those understandable and almost unavoidable necessities to make it work.
Yeah, the problem was for the Nolan trilogy. What I'm surprised is that both the Riddler and the Penguin didn't show up. Because they were pretty grounded in reality, especially the Penguin, who, out of all the who's actually questionably the most sane of Batman's rogues gallery, because everyone else is just batshit insane.
I think that's a case more of the look, getting the right character to play the Penguin, because you are correct on that regard. But at the same time, the Penguin, like, look how Danny DeVito played it in Batman Returns.
Yeah.
Like, that's an image that's hard to get out of people's heads, and you'd have to recreate that. Good luck doing that with Nolan's setup.
Yeah, just find someone with a big nose, put a fat suit on them there, and voila. And a tuxedo.
Riddler, on the other hand, I think you could pull it off. You have a couple of challenges, mainly the fact that a lot of people probably still had the Schumacher duology on their brains.
Oh, yeah.
That long since then.
But then again, that would be rendered moot because you had Bane.
Yeah. Okay, fair argument. I think by the time of Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, I think by then you probably could have put in the Riddler, but by then there was really no need because, one, the Joker had already been done and he had pretty much killed it. Heath Ledger, rest in peace. And honestly, with the story that Nolan had been setting up by that point, where would the Riddler have fit? Maybe if that had been like the second movie and Joker had not been involved, you could have gotten away with the Riddler. But by the time Dark Knight Returns came around, there was no room for him to fit.
I know that with the upcoming The Batman, they're trying to do the Riddler, which honestly is the right time to do it, although that's going to have other problems, namely the fact that there's a small part of me that feels bad for the fact that I outright defended Robert Pattinson playing Batman because he has been acting like a fucking idiot. Not in terms of anything that would get him clown car, but he's complaining about how much of a physical toll that this is taking when he outright said he didn't want to do the extreme amount of workout stuff that Bale did.
So basically, he's basically whining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hate whiners.
You should have known what you were signing up for there, Pat.
This is the. I don't. Now that said, I don't take back the defense that I had for him, where I said that it's unfair to lambast him just on his role with Twilight, because he's made it clear he hates that role. But when it comes to when it comes to it, the interesting thing is I often hear about the fact that there's no way that you can convert that sort of movie-going audience into comic readers. To an extent, I do agree with this. You're not going to be able to convert the entirety of a movie-going audience into another medium. Not just with film to comics. This is something that you can apply with any sort of jump between mediums. And it's going to go the other way around too. A fair amount of comic book readers aren't going to be converted into watching your film. However,
sorry, go ahead.
However, that doesn't mean that you can't bridge the gap to create at least some level of a gateway drug. I know that you can do this because I've seen it done. And this is where I bring us to Exhibit A during the Sam Raimi era with Spider-Man. Because around that time, there were 3 Spider-Man comics, all of which were very clearly taking their notes from the films. Chief among them being organic webbing instead of a created web shooter. But there's also the fact that there was Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and Peter Parker Spider-Man, each with different writers and doing different storytelling styles. The lattermost of which, Peter Parker Spider-Man, was being written by none other than friggin' JMS.
I think the real issue at the end of the day, when it came to the MCU, is marketing. Like, how often was Marvel touting the comics in any capacity? You have your own movie studio making movies based on your own properties. How the hell are you not turning around and putting an ad here and there, right before the movie saying, hey, you enjoy this movie? Go read the comics for more. It's not that hard to do. Hell, have people have characters in the background reading some of the new comics to help promote things. Yeah, it'll date this movie a little bit on the outside, but it's such a little thing that it wouldn't ruin the movie to do so. You've got every opportunity to promote the ever-loving shit out of your comics, and you're not using it.
It's all the more apparent that how blatantly this is a case of leaving money on the table when you've got more money than God at this point, and you're making money hand over fist.
Yeah.
At the very least. Now, admittedly, this is a bit of a story that leans more into the tabletop realm of things, but I want to share this to kind of demonstrate a point with this. So, a few years back, because I've mentioned this particular game in the past, there was a game called Marvel Heroic Role-Playing. Really good game. Managed to get 2 Ennies and 2 Origins Awards the year it came out. And within the basic core rulebook, there was an adventure called Breakout, which was based on New Avengers #1. I know for a fact, from being on forums and Reddit at the time, that there were people who went out and bought that particular comic after going through that adventure to kind of get an idea about what the plan was in that. I distinctly remember some people I knew were able to delved into comics like Spawn, thanks to the popularity of the animated series. Which, for the record, I think anybody who has an interest in animation should take a look at that and see why it ended up winning the awards that it did. Now Rudist Hazard has a few other points that he brings up in the chat. One more point of distribution. Rather, they could or couldn't have gotten the books into other markets as a secondary concern to how effectively they created a hostage market out of retailers. The dissolution of the return policies, along with a cornered market, meant they could sell unsellable books to retailers that would put up with it, like other markets wouldn't. They created an environment where they could push books to retailers that the retailers couldn't push to customers, meaning effectively they no longer had to try and could pursue pet projects and social media narcissism instead. The result was an inevitable drop in quality.
Oh,
there definitely
yeah.
is that, and while unfortunately I wasn't there for the meeting itself, I do recall hearing a couple years ago that a Marvel representative who was at, I believe it was San Diego Comic-Con, talking with representatives for a bunch of different stores, got verbally tarred and feathered because of the fact that the stores were getting really mad that they were having books being pushed on them that they knew weren't selling, but they had to get it because of the whole bulk discount thing.
Oh yeah, and I think this is a good segue into mentioning another big problem with the comic book industry, and that is comic book shops. Ooh, they raw dogged the hell out of them with this bullshit.
This was the other half of that distribution thing. Like, this was a place where at every turn they were getting screwed. You couldn't sell them in stores anymore because there just wasn't enough space for all the different comics that were coming out. And so comic shops had to be the way to go. And then Marvel and DC, in different ways, completely screwed the pooch. First, DC trying to set up the Diamond deal, tried to be their sole distributor, and then fucking that whole thing up. And then Marvel turning, and then all the other distributors getting screwed over as a result. Thus, everyone in Marvel trying to do their Marvel World deal at the exact same time, completely botching that whole thing up, thus making Diamond literally the only game in town, to the point where they had to stop the government from throwing antitrust violations, because if Diamond went down, the industry would have been fucked.
And they did that. They did for a time. Remember last year, pencils down.
Mm-hmm. And once the whole pencils down thing happened, that I saw that as basically a death knell for the amount of control that Diamond could have.
Yeah, it took something that extreme to just finally get people to say, okay, we need some competition here, or else this industry is going to be just as bad as it was in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
If not worse.
Exactly. So yeah, that's how bad things kept getting, because they just kept doing this to themselves.
And not only that, again, the Comicsgate artists, all the guys they're publishing their works on Indiegogo, they're starting to outsell them. They're making money hand over fist.
Because indie comic writers don't have to deal with all that bullshit. Plus, they understand the need to play with the time, to go with the times, evolve and do stuff like, go do digital only comics, or like you said, do stuff like Indiegogo, so you don't have to worry about getting funded by the big two or even any of the smaller companies like, Valiant or any of the other groups. Mm-hmm. It was just a series of factors that works in their favor.
Yeah, and you know what? They've earned, all these artists combined, I would say, of course, and that is official Comic-Gate artists and affiliates. I would guesstimate they made about 15 to 20 million in the last couple of years.
Plus, there's another aspect to that I think also adds to that success, is the fact that these indie artists, they don't have to do exactly, they don't have to follow any trends set by the big two. If they don't want to do a superhero comic, they don't have to do a superhero comic. They can do whatever the fuck they want. Whereas Marvel and DC, because of how they've been established as the big superhero comic companies, they have to do that, because every time they try to do something different, nobody fucking buys it.
For a while, you know what the funny thing is, one of the things that helped Marvel really make its name in the 80s was adapting other people's work. A really big example of this sort of thing is the comic adaptation they did of Star Wars. And the main reason I remember it is because it was in my library. But they have a long history of this sort of thing, or the fact that they were instrumental for getting both G.I. Joe and Transformers off the ground, because of the fact that they pulled the whole thing of, we're going to advertise a toy line by not advertising a toy line, and thus we're able to skirt past some of the restrictions that were going on at the time. But but the thing that's really funny about that whole we're a comic book company is I earlier last year I had the developer of Troubleshooters on the podcast, and through them as well as the developers of another game, Broken Compass. One topic that was brought up was the fact that the superhero comic did not have as much of a foothold in Europe as it does in North America. The big mover and shaker in those areas were adventure comics.
Yeah,
Stuff
I mean
stuff like Tintin.
that, and don't forget 2000 AD.
To the
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm pretty sure somebody could argue the superhero-ness of Judge Dredd, but the thing to keep in mind is that one, I'd say Judge Dredd is a parody. Two, 2000 AD was a lot more than just Judge Dredd.
Yeah.
And I mean, you had Slain, you had Rogue Trooper, you had a bunch of side projects related to Dredd. All of
Yeah,
it
so
within
yeah, 2000 AD was more self-contained universe, wasn't it?
I'd say if I were to compare 2000 AD to anything, it was you could say it was the UK's answer to Metal Hurlant. Wow, that's real bad French. For us filthy English speakers, the heavy metal magazine.
Ah, yeah. So it's an anthology universe then. Okay,
Yes.
that makes sense.
Yeah. But this is once again where we should prove that Marvel completely fucked everything up in the 90s because they kept screwing over their international groups until basically they got completely shuttered.
Yeah, that's it, and that's I think that's where I think a lot of the Marvel and DC, they can't get over the whole superhero deal. I mean, comics just doesn't isn't just about superheroes, etc. You can branch out. I mean, there's very few comics that has done that.
DC had a fairly successful non-superhero line for years. It was called Vertigo. And now we already know the story about the I was going to say woman that killed it. But there were a lot of really good things that came out of Vertigo. I would say Vertigo was what really helped make the careers of Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore.
Absolutely.
I'm not gonna mention the figure that rhymes with soapy.
Yeah. That's not to say that Gaiman and Moore didn't contribute a whole lot to superhero comics. It's just that the stuff that Alan Moore did with his non-superhero work, even if something like Hellblazer was just a glorified excuse for him to draw Sting, not the singer, not the wrestler. I always need to make that clear. And Neil Gaiman's work with Sandman needs no introduction, to the point that it has my second favorite interpretation of death. But those showed that you can do other things, and plus there's already a burgeoning non-comic style of market within the 90s. You know, especially with comics like The Crow. And granted, there's also the fact that companies like Dark Horse and Dynamite have made their bread and butter on adapting other people's work. The only thing from Dark Horse that didn't pan out was their superhero universe that only lasted 2 years.
Yeah. They realized that's not our game. We'll leave that to the other guys who apparently know this shit better than we do. We're just gonna do what we can do best. And oh, look at that, it worked.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the whole do what they do best thing, a bit of the sus these days, but what you gonna do?
Yeah, they don't have two good ideas to rub together these days.
Yeah. But the the other thing is that I think for a lot of us who did get into comics, we ended up jumping in likely due to an impulse buy. I'm only going to speak from my own experiences, but I distinctly remember getting this grab bag of like 40 different comics from different Marvel properties for like $20 at a Toys R Us when I was a kid. And that was how I got introduced to several characters that would be mainstays for me ever since. A few names in particular that stuck with me. Obviously Spider-Man and several characters from the X-Men, but Iron Fist, Night Thrasher, Spawn, not Spawn, Ghost Rider. Although I did fall in with Spawn like every other edgelord in the 90s, no surprise there. Doctor Strange, the Fantastic Four, which the main thing I take away from that was one of the many times that Doom somehow stumbled upon getting cosmic powers. Because it's Doom and Doom is the comic book version of Maxwell Jacob Friedman. Just with better fashion sense. Yes, I said it. But with a lot of those issues, I was jumping right into them. I didn't know who anybody in the New Warriors was when I first found out about that. I didn't know who Luke Cage and Iron Fist were. I sure as hell didn't know who the Watcher was. And sometimes I wish I still didn't.
Yeah, you can't unsee that shit.
But the point is I jumped into it through those just and through the strength of the writing that I saw in it and some of the art. Although there were definitely plenty of instances of very 90s art. Let's put it that way. Because one of them was Cable #1, but it's not the Cable #1 you're thinking of. It wasn't Cable Blood and Metal. It was a different one. Which doesn't exactly help my point here, but that's why I specifically focused on that impulse buy thing. And even with the amount of comics, a smart way to work around that would be to have a sort of Marvel monthly that's a compilation of different stories, kind of like a book version of an album sampler. And then having forms so that people could order ones that would seem interesting. That's not exactly a perfect solution, but it's at least something. But I think right around the time Phase 2 was starting to come about, after the first Avengers movie had come and gone, that we were starting to see the problem, because they, instead of trying to make these movies self-contained, they wanted to make them all part of this interconnected thing. And while it certainly is a good way to get the forums talking, there's one unintended consequence of this sort of thing. And that's the fact that you effectively have to have all the writers in the same room. Chase, do you remember that? Do you remember that gag when Linkara was talking about the fiefdom problem that happens in a shared superhero universe?
Mm.
Oh
It's like
boy, I'm trying to fight the urge right now.
it's like I I have concocted a story in which Superman and Wonder Woman team up to take on Lex Luthor. Nay, I am the editor. I am the editor of the Superman books, and you will not use Lex Luthor and your story. I protest. You will not use Wonder Woman in your story unless you call to this event comic.
I remember that.
And the
Yeah,
point,
well, that's exactly what happened.
yeah, and the point is that this sort of when you have to account for a shared universe, there are more things that you have to account for, and you can't just write a story. It's one of those. It's not a case of too many cooks in the kitchen. A better analogy would be getting lost in the trees. You know, you instead of just writing a good guy bad guy story, you've got to write all these other stories and then do trademark bending long-term booking, because everything's got to build up to inevitably that Avengers movie, and not everything can. And that leads to because of that, obviously you're going to have more hands in the writing room. And unfortunately, if somebody who's directing a film, even no matter what, they want to input their particular style within the film.
And then comes the problem is that style clashes with the overall style of the franchise.
Yeah. This is why despite his strengths as a director and as a writer, this is why I've often felt that taking the Joss Whedon method with the crossovers and having that bleed into the other films leads to a problem, because as I've looked back on Joss Whedon's abilities as a writer and director, I've noticed something whenever he doesn't have an all-star cast, and even when he does, this ends up being a problem. Now, Racevic pointed this out in his review of Halo ODST, but the problem is his characters don't have a unique voice. You know, they all crack wise, yet somehow maintain a veneer of professionalism, but there's not a whole lot of variation between each character that does this. And once you see it enough times, you can't unsee it. I'd say if there's anything that's the quintessential example of this particular issue, look at the writing when it comes to Guardians of the Galaxy. As much as I liked Guardians of the Galaxy, it's kind of emblematic of this problem. I hope I didn't kill you guys with that.
No, I'm just tired is all.
And we've got two people here muted. Doku apparently is having technical problems again. So, standard fare for the monastery. We do call it the world's greatest shit show.
Mm-hmm.
But even with that, I'd say with when they start. Let me posit this. When this whole MCU idea was really starting to get going, do you think that somebody at Marvel Studios should have gone to the comic division and said, "We need you to make some changes"?
If we were talking about the the good days of the comics and had the good writers involved, absolutely, I think that'd have been amazing. But when you look, going back to what Aaron then brought up earlier, if you took the writers of today and tried to do that, it would have been a disaster.
As if it can't be any worse than it is now. And I'd say if there's one thing that's really emblematic of the issue, it was that right around the time that the MCU movies are really hitting their stride during Phase 2. For whatever reason, the comic division wanted to highlight, of all things, fucking Squirrel Girl, a character that for my entire life has been a joke.
Ha!
Yeah.
Yeah. They somehow wanted to push her as a major character in the comics, and yet, again, this goes back to why the comics don't sell. Who in the anyone who watches the MCU, how many of them would have even have heard of Squirrel Girl? And if they have, who would have looked at that and go, "Oh yeah, that seems like a good fit"?
No, basically, the problem with that with Squirrel Girl, why they try to make her into a major serious character. I think what I think the problem is just one word: self-insertion.
Oh, there definitely was that, and you're seeing that now with some of the young adult authors who are trying to make their mark in DC.
Oh God, they're trying to. Yeah, that's another thing that's the problem with some of these writers, or I use the term writers loosely. The flamboyant and unbridled narcissism. Jesus Christ Almighty!
Something else that I think is worth noting is, and I realize the irony of me of all people saying this, but in a lot of the comics from the big two, there's too much text.
Oh yeah, wall of text. I mean, I remember this was like anyone remember the Warrior comics?
Someone sent me one of those as a gag gift years ago.
Oh, we're talking about a Great Wall of China style of text.
He's not kidding, people. He's seriously not kidding.
And it's all warrior gibberish.
And worse yet,
what the fuck is this True City?
That is a question many have tried to answer and none have succeeded. And Aaron, let's not forget how bad this gets, because in one issue, they didn't even bother to put a proper background behind the text, so you literally couldn't read a fucking word of it.
Oh yeah, it's like they all blend in the background. It's like that meme. It's like that meme where you got some guys squinting and trying to find out what the hell is that paper.
I ended up using when somebody posted one image from that sort of thing. I ended up posting the meme of, "We've got the Pentagon's top cryptologist working 24/7 trying to figure out what the fuck you just said." But I've seen some people make the comparison that a lot of them are writing like they would write for a webcomic. I can't even go with that because I know webcomics that don't use that much fucking text.
Seriously.
I think that pretty much sums up my feeling on those comics.
But when it comes to and of course the other major factor is all of the attempts to reboot. Except the funny thing is, whenever I've seen the attempt at rebooting a line or what have you, or even rebooting an entire universe, All it does is further justify my hatred for soft reboots as a general concept. Because if you're gonna do a reboot of any kind, be it for a TV show, be it for a comic, be it for a book, be it for I don't know, a music career, anything, you cannot half-ass it. You're effectively blowing it up the same way a sports team should be blowing up their roster so that they can start fresh.
Yeah, looking at you, Bears.
You know, instead, if you try and do this half in, half out, it's going to be worse than doing nothing, because all you're going to do is remind your audience about the good stuff that they missed out on. And this is the reason why the only quote unquote reboot that I'd say actually worked was Crisis on Infinite Earths, the one that was designed basically to clean house.
Yeah. Because they realized how badly they had mucked everything up with all the different universes and all the different versions of heroes and the utter confusion it caused. And of course, what do future writers do? Bring it all back because they missed the old days. Congratulations, you fucked it up.
Now, at the very least, Infinite Crisis was trying to say something about the double-edged sword of nostalgia. It's just that Jeff Johns was the absolute last person who should be throwing stones in that glass house.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I don't hate Jeff Johns, but he has his limits. He's very good at writing popcorn stories. Although I'm hesitant to call him the Michael Bay. And Rudis points out that Cena Grace could write wonderful X-Men characters. He knew how Emma Frost's mind works, no doubt. He knew the characters, but what ruined his books was how he turned Bobby Drake into this over-the-top, vapid, sociopathic extension of himself instead of the character. Branding his enemies by freezing and burning their skin away while giggling isn't exactly what I expect out of a hero, which is another thing. I think last week I remember seeing an article where Richard Donner, of all people, was saying that this whole dark hero thing needs to die.
Yes.
And
yeah,
on some level I do agree. I do agree with that.
It's overdone.
It's overdone, and two, it's gotten overdone to the point where people have not only misunderstood but disunderstood what a hero is, to the point that, as I pointed out on Twitter a while back, there are some people who are actively trying to campaign for having Poison Ivy be acknowledged as a hero.
No. Let's just put it this way. It's more like they're trying to give it the Suicide Squad treatment. And that in and of itself was fizzled out. Was such a non-starter.
The thing is, ideally, whenever I've seen the Suicide Squad in the comics, at least, it's made very clear that that these are not good guys. They are very much bad guys, and it's more of a case of we're working with you, but we're probably going to stab you in the back later.
Mm-hmm.
And of course Marvel has their own version of that with the Thunderbolts. But consider, like, in a case of life imitating art, consider the fact that for the image used for the topic tonight, we have Captain America. Why do people gravitate toward a character like Captain America?
It's in the name.
Not quite. The reason why people would gravitate toward a character like Captain America is largely the same reason that they gravitate toward a character like Superman. The whole nobody would be that good if they had that kind of power is ultimately a childish interpretation. Because these are people who did and show that you can be that good of a person. For me, the importance in the mythology of a superhero is the representation of an ideal. I think this is why Professor Geek has made a comparison between superheroes and mythology, and I'm vastly understating his take. I highly recommend his videos on the matter. But you already have a fair amount of heroic archetypes in superhero fiction, much like you have certain archetypes in Greco-Roman or Japanese and so on mythology. And as a case in point, when it comes to that approach, you don't need to be a ideal goody-good in order to have some sort of ideal. Because for me growing up, one of the heroic ideals was a character like Spider-Man, who definitely is not in the top 1% in the way that he works.
Yeah. That was kind of the whole point of the character, really.
Although unfortunately some writers end up flanderizing it to the point where he becomes nothing more than a sad fic, but that's a failure of bad writers. And Hazard also points out that a lot of them are doing self-inserts for the power fantasy, which is definitely the case. I think a lot of people at Marvel and DC have the attitude of they want to be known as a comic book writer more than actually doing the act of writing comic books. It doesn't help that a lot of them don't seem to have a very poor understanding about how fellow humans actually work. But a big thing that I want to shine a bit of a light on is the fact that with a character like Spider-Man, and just with heroic characters in general, you have this whole thing of them overcoming what's in front of them instead of constantly breaking them down. You've got to build it up, and that's why now, Shades. I have been going through Hiroaka with you during the Toonami calls on Saturdays, and I was not exaggerating when I said that Hirokishi has a better understanding of superheroes than the big two. Because Deku very much is in the same vein as Spider-Man.
Yeah. Flawed, self-conscious, always doubting himself at times.
But is able to rise to the occasion when the time comes.
Yeah.
I'd say this, even though it's not a superhero story, I'd say the same thing applies when it comes to Demon Slayer. In fact, That, in fact, the funny thing about it is both of them having green as a primary color in that regard.
Hell, someone made a meme of the two of them. Like, what would happen if Tanjiro and Deku got into a fight? They wouldn't fight; they'd hug it out.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, in the other room, Inosuke and Bakugo. Yeah, I would do the Joy Styles impression, but I can't get that pitch.
Can't fight, can't fight. Oh my God, can't fight.
I think we needed Maddie for that one.
Eh.
Well, the name of the game is improvisation. But when it comes to the other thing that I'd say is one of the big reasons why manga keeps kicking the ass of comic books to the point that Marvel has actively entertained soliciting certain manga creators to do spins on their own characters is the fact that the development of a manga is a very self-contained experience. You usually have the writer, the artist, sometimes in the same person, the editors, and that's largely it. Like Jump and subsequently Shueisha tends to be unless I'm mistaken, they tend to be very hands-off with the mangaka in their employ.
Yeah, they know better than to mess with that creative flow unless there is an absolute necessity. The one time that the studios stepped in and the exec stepped in was with Dragon Ball because of the fact it was a runaway hit and kept pushing Akira Toriyama to make more. And well, we all know how that turned out.
Mm-hmm. If I recall correctly, there was the only two examples I can think of where Shueisha actually got involved were that and Bleach, which was one of the things that contributed to why Tite Kubo retired after Bleach finished.
Yeah, because he basically got shoved out. Then again, that's partly his own doing because he kept trying to stretch it out when it was clear things were there was no end point in sight. Like he just wanted to keep going on forever at the rate he was going.
Mm-hmm. So I'd say in the case of Bleach, that's a case of there's shit in everybody's yard.
Mm-hmm. But with Dragon Ball, Akira Toriyama, he had a natural endpoint. He wanted to end at the end of the Cell Saga because it was a natural endpoint. Goku was dead. Gohan had taken his place, and there was really no need to continue on. But at that point, Dragon Ball had become such a cash cow that they kind of had to keep it going. So, yeah. And thus we got the Cell Saga, or the Buu Saga. And then they wanted to keep going further, and Akira Toriyama was like, fuck you, I'm done. And then we got GT.
And GT had some good concepts. I can't.
You can't even say that with a straight face.
Now GT's no longer canon because it's Super.
Super.
I tried to play devil's advocate for GT. I can't fucking do it. I'm not a miracle worker, people.
and of course, Kira brings up, then Toriyama finally retconned it back because, well, Dragon Ball Evolution fucked it up so bad that he's like, I've got to do something about this. And then we got Super, and you know what? I gotta hit a button on that. Let's see, where's my button? Yeah, here it is. Yeah, Kira Toriyama brings in Super, but guess what?
They fucked that up too.
Of course they did.
Yeah, and now the Super is a mixed bag. Like there are some arcs that I liked, some arcs that a good chunk of Goku Black, even though it gave us the infamous line that will forever mark Trunks as a racist.
Yeah,
God.
you get that you get that arc, which it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty decent overall. And then you get the turn him to power,
where we once again return you to our regularly scheduled program of Drag On Ball.
But yeah, the point where I'm getting at with all this to try to get back on the rails here is that the thing with manga, and this is something we kind of briefly talked about earlier, is that when it comes to manga adaptations and how they draw readers to the manga, is when you read a manga, when you watch the anime and then you turn around and read the manga, you're getting essentially the same story. You may get some differences here, anime only stuff or stuff that was cut out of the manga because they couldn't fit it in time. But you when you pick up Demon Slayer, let's say you've seen Mugen Train, you loved that movie, the one he's like, I want to read the story of this. You pick up the first issue of Demon Slayer, you already know the characters right away. You see Tanjiro, you see Inosuke, you see Zenitsu, you see Nezuko. They're all there. It's like, okay, this feels familiar. I can get into this. But like we said with the MCU, you go to pick up. Let's go to the extreme example with a movie that I know everyone loves to talk about, Captain Marvel.
Ugh.
Yeah.
I know.
I don't wanna.
I'm going so. I know you don't wanna, but trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. You pick up, you see Captain Marvel. Let's say for some miracle, there are people out there that actually liked Captain Marvel. They do exist. We know they exist. We don't agree with them, but let's just play this up. If they wanted to go, let's say they actually went to the comic store and looked up issues of Captain Marvel. They're going to look through half of those issues, and they're going to see several Captain Marvels. They're like, that's not the Captain Marvel I know. You've got the very original Captain Marvel, which obviously, was a male. Definitely not the Captain Marvel they know. And then you've had several other variations of the female Captain Marvel. Several different, and not just Carol Danvers. There's other female Captain Marvels that have started showing up lately. Mm-hmm. Now you're getting confused. Now you've got confused, and that's not even getting to the fact that DC had their own Captain Marvel for a while.
Well, actually, DC had the first one. If we want to get real technical.
So then you've got that, all these and people are going to see those back and like, okay, where do I start? You can make the argument, you can argue left and right about the overwhelming amount of issues to start from or the stories to start from, but just characters, just finding something with the character you recognize is nearly impossible. Hell, even with Captain America, you have that problem because there's been multiple Captain Americas. Not always Steve Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the problem you run into is that that unfortunately, and some of this is not even really Marvel's fault, but they haven't exactly helped things either.
That's another problem I forgot to bring up earlier, but it goes back to the if you go watch a movie or you're expecting a certain type of storyline or a certain type of character, and you don't see that in the books. Obviously, it's not going to sell books, and a big part of that is a self-fulfilling prophecy where if a certain run of a certain series or certain character isn't selling well and you have to reboot it over and over and over and over, it's hard to keep up with, let alone get a consistent and fulfilling storyline or a good plot going. Because you never get that chance just because the book isn't selling. Versus you go and you look at, say, again, Kimetsu no Yaiba, it's a start to finish consistent plot. So you can say even when it comes to watching anime, oh, I just watched this first season. Where do I pick up in the manga after this? Oh, go to volume 23. It's a start to finish plot. It's not just rebooting the same thing over and over and over again, which is, in my opinion, a uniquely Western problem when it comes to the medium, at least of comic books, anyway.
I'd say it's a uniquely North American problem because I've yet to hear about this reboot issue going on a lot in Europe or in the UK.
Okay, that's fair. I'll give you that. It's a distinctly Marvel DC problem. Even IDW doesn't run into this issue as frequently, at least not to the point where it's I don't know what issue to buy. Why is this one different than this? Why are we going back to issue number 1? Why is this the main character and not this? Like, it confuses people. It's, for lack of a better term, it's a bit of a clusterfuck, and it makes it very hard to break in to any of the stories that you might want to read in a way that you can actually follow along with the plot line. Manga doesn't have that problem.
Hell, the only problem manga has is that sometimes the anime doesn't ever finish the story, so you have to go to the manga to keep reading.
Mm-hmm.
Read the source endings, the bane of my existence.
Yeah, that is a problem. I'll admit I was getting very pissed off at ReZero for taking so damn long to come out to season 2, and now I'm so far ahead I don't even care about watching the anime anymore.
Yeah, and of course there's it's not like the transition between anime to manga to anime ends up being perfect. We're all familiar with instances where that ball gets dropped. But even with those, for one, a lot of those ball droppings I'd say are products of their relative time because the ball dropping doesn't happen as frequently as it did, say, a decade ago. In fact, yesterday, as some of you know, I talked about the announcement of Record of Ragnarok getting a anime, and given the track record of adaptations over the last few years, I think I can have a reasonable expectation that it's going to follow its source material reasonably closely. And I think the main reason that you see that is there's not this expectation to put out stuff constantly on a weekly basis.
Yeah. All right. Listen up. I'm gonna bounce, guys. So I'll take care.
All right, man. Stay frosty. But when it comes, the funny thing is, I could easily see this getting laughed off, but I can't help but wonder if Marvel and DC both had decent representations in non-film media that audience could be transferred over just as easily. Is I'm pretty sure that a fair few people picked up their first issue of a Marvel comic through seeing these characters in Marvel vs. Capcom, or something like, or even something like the X-Men arcade game with some of its infamous lines. My favorite being "Welcome to Die."
I am Magneto, master of magnet.
I will say, just a little of a side, credit to the guys who did the remaster of that for the PS3. They re-recorded the lines, but made sure to keep the cheese. They just re-recorded it for better audio quality. They didn't change the lines to make it sound more respectable. No, they're like, no, people remember it for the cheesy lines. You keep that shit in.
We have a similar thing when it comes to Final Fantasy IV. That's the reason why, even though it's a mistranslation, "You Spoony Bard" has been in every port of that game.
You don't fuck with that because that's what people remember.
Mm-hmm.
That I am error line in Dota 2.
Oh yeah, if they remastered Zelda 2, they'd have to keep that fucking line. Actually, that's a whole different story because that was actually supposed to be there. That was the original line. It was the character Bagu that they fucked up. because that's supposed to be Bug. They were brothers, Terror and Bug.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's getting off the rails a bit there, but still, like, yeah, that kind of thing, like these, adaptations to other mediums, like, video games or even animated series. It really depends. Because once again, you run into the same problem of how do adapting these storylines into something that can be accessible to audiences, while at the same time guiding people to the comics where the stories match up. You can run the risk of that not being possible because of all the stuff we've mentioned earlier.
And I am not going to pretend that it's an easy thing to do. But I would argue that it'll be much better for it's much better in the bottom line if you do it, because of the fact that you're going to have things that you can fall back on.
I think the solution is going to come in layers. Like, this is not just a one move fix. First things first, I think every one of us agree, and Aaron would probably laugh along with me with this. Get better writers and get your comics back on track. That is your first step. You need to get that fixed before you could do anything else. Once you've got that done, your next step is to read the room, find out which stories are likely going to be the big hits, and start adapting those immediately. You see an upcoming Iron Man movie that's looking like it's going to be hot. Make that your next or you see an Iron Man story that's going to be hot. Make that your next Iron Man movie. Adapt that. You see or in this case, we'll say Thor, because I think Thor's still going to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Make your next Thor movie something in line with what's happening in the comics. At this point, you've got the room to do that now. So expand a little bit. Then that way, when people see the movie, and like, oh, hey, the recent comics are matching that storyline. Let's see where it goes from there. And voila.
I think
exactly what the mangas do.
I think a big problem is that right when the movies were getting popular, specifically Marvel in particular, while the movies were going on and they were going with their self-contained story, the comics just went off the rails and did something completely different that had nothing to do with the movie plot or even the classic characters that the movies were based off of. Back when they did the all new, all different run. Mm-hmm. And that's where, in my opinion, that's where Marvel really screwed the pooch. I mean, if you want to do this whole all new, all different thing, do it at a time where you can at least align it with what's actually selling, i.e. the movies. Don't try to change everything like midway through and be like, oh, you like Thor? Here's Jane Foster Thor. Save that. Keep it on the back burner, or do it as a mini-series or a side run. Don't just get rid of Thor completely. Like, you're not going to sell any books that way.
This was clearly a case of the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And even then, I've actually defended, much to the chagrin of some of the more pro-Comicsgate people that I talked to, if you at least had some good writers and you paid attention to the source material and the history of the characters, there's a way you could do Jane Foster Thor that would be good and make a lot of sense. I.e., Thor's incapacitated. She has no choice but to take up the hammer, even though it's going to kill her. And you explore that as essentially a 12-issue story plot. You could do it in a way that actually would be good. But they don't want to put the effort into actually writing a good story or a compelling character. They just think that by checking boxes down the list, people are going to buy it. And that's not the way it works.
The big companies, and again, this expands beyond just comics, every big industry, movies, television, comics, video games, they all have this mentality of our audiences are simple-minded and it doesn't take much to sell. But history has shown time and time and time again that is not the case. We ask for nuance. We beg for nuance. We don't need it to be super complex, but we need some nuance in our stories. We need something some meat on them bones for it to work. And if you don't give us that, we will reject it. And they never fucking learn.
I'd say another issue that I think is worth delving into is the fact that a lot of people within those companies are either unable or unwilling to face the big questions. How often have we seen employees from a given company get really defensive over even the slightest bit of criticism?
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna head out, guys.
All right, stay frosty, man.
Care.
Like how often have we seen? We just had this a fucking week ago, where some people working at Lucasfilm were outright mocking Star Wars theory for his whole crying instance, seeing what happens at the end of The Mandalorian. I'm not going to spoil, but the fact that they were mocking him and then they ended up getting completely bodied for that mockery ultimately demonstrates what I'm talking about here. I've now Rudis brings up the whole not wanting politics in comics. It's the phrasing. I do think that people, I think that a lot of people on both sides have fallen into the trap of focusing way too much on the wording of that particular phrase and not the intent. Because the phrase that I have chosen to use instead is you are a writer. If you want to be a preacher, the church is that way.
Yeah.
There's a way to incorporate politics into a story and have it make sense. It's the problem is that the writers that are employed by Marvel and DC in particular don't understand subtlety. They don't understand nuance. They only know how to hit you over the head with a freaking sledgehammer. Like, this is the politics you should ascribe by, and these people are bad, these people are good. There's no, in the words of George R. R. Martin, bad guys are good guys playing for the other team. They don't explore the other side. They don't give any real compelling story to it. It just comes off as soapbox preaching, and nobody really wants to read that because it doesn't make for a good story.
Yeah, let me make an analogy from another franchise, a very popular one, Doctor Who. Because Doctor Who, for its long tenure, has always had political stories in its writing. Always. Mm-hmm. Even from the outset. But there was always some subtle nuance to its political messages. It challenged you to think about it. It didn't outright tell you it was wrong. It just said, you know what, here's the side that you should think about. But then you get to the current era, and the best example of where I'm going with this is the episode Orphan 55. This is my go-to example for any time people say that, politics in Doctor Who has always been a thing. Here's my argument of why that particular story doesn't work. Because it beats you over the fucking head with the climate change agenda. You're like, protect the earth or this will be your future. No, that doesn't work. You can challenge why we need to fix the environment. Yes, that's a very important thing to think about. But you can't just outright tell us, save the environment.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. You could have there's this much plastic in the ocean, and all of a sudden, oh crap, it's led to some sort of genetic mutation in the wildlife, and all of a sudden it's attacking the citizens. There's a way to set a story that takes the nuance of modern politics or socioeconomic, sociopolitical issues and frames them in a way that's still an entertaining story to read without beating you over the head with it.
It's also not that hard to do because there is a framework that writers have been relying on to give particular cultural mores and the like for centuries.
Well,
Fairy tales, folk tales, that kind of thing. If you look at a lot of folk tales, a lot of them reinforce certain aspects in their particular cultures.
Well, so there's a good example of this idea of nuance when it comes to talking about using the example of like environmentalism and storytelling. I forget her name, but she has the black fenric fox as her avatar. Alteron, something like that. But she was reviewing a movie that came out somewhat recently, and the premise is that there's a town in Maryland, and there's a large chicken farm. They feed the chickens, steroids and everything like that, and they take the chicken shit and they put it too close to the bay, and it ends up mutating a form of seaborne lice or louse, and it gets inside the human body and it eats you from the inside out to the point where they said they found one that was like 2 feet long trying to burrow into a submarine. It that's how you take a story addressing climate change or environmental issues and put it in such a way that it's still a compelling story that doesn't beat you over the head with its message. I don't know why Marvel and DC writers can't do this, but apparently they can't.
Actually, I think I might have the argument, and it's a very simple one. Because doing that would require hiring good writers, and good writers don't come cheap.
Not only do they
It
not
all
come
comes
cheap,
back to money.
not only do they not come cheap, which given the amount of money that they're making in other parts, you'd think that wouldn't be a problem. But there's the fact that that I think at this juncture, a good writer would look at the Marvel DC scene as it is and say, why would I want to work for a place where my creativity is going to be compromised? I could be Me Too'd or worse at a fucking whim, or I can take the alternate route of working for a smaller place that's going to give me some leeway and let me actually write what I intended to write. And that's why I had said a while back, keep a very close eye on, in the comic book realm, people like Boom Studios. They're going to be where the eyes are going to be on in the next 5 years. In the realm of tabletop, I kept telling people, keep a very close eye on Pinnacle. They already have a decent footprint as it is, and that footprint's going to get bigger in the coming years. It's for the same reason. And Teacup also brings up Star Trek created indirect analogies with aliens and interactions of alien cultures. The height of that being DS9. Yes, it is, because you don't fuck with the Cisco.
Oh, there's another issue that we haven't touched on yet, and this is not unique to Marvel or DC, but just sort of geekdom in general in regards to the fandom versus the creators. There's a certain standard that has been set because of how much lore has been established, whether you're talking Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel, DC, and the people that are actually going to go out and consume these products, and they have a better understanding of the lore and the universe and the themes, more so than the writers. And the writers can't seem to reconcile with the fact that the fandom knows more about the projects they're supposedly working on as opposed to the people actually working on these projects, and they kind of lose their shit when they get called out about it.
When the smart thing to do is, instead of trying to swim up shit creek without a paddle, lean into it. You don't swim against the current. Because
And that's the
ultimately, a single creator is going to be one person. Whereas a combined fandom, especially a suitably motivated one, is going to be dozens, if not hundreds, of people.
Well, and that's the thing. When it comes to these types of fandoms and these types of franchises, if they were smart as far as the creators are going, you should listen to the feedback that the fandom is giving you, and every idea they toss at you, don't pull a round head and go, your Snoke theory is stupid. You should probably listen to what they're saying, because chances are they probably have a better story than you do. And this has been proven on several occasions. It's not just The Last Jedi. There's a reason J.J. Abrams' Star Trek gets a lot of flack too.
Yeah, and now that's not to say that you have to incorporate every single idea, because let's be honest, even the fans can sometimes get a little ridiculous with their ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But always take them into consideration. And if enough people are saying you should do this, you might want to at least listen to that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, even as someone who is a staunch nerd when it comes to these types of franchises, even I still hear about things that I didn't know. Like, because there's so much lore and history behind it. These people do this as a hobby that would make the creators that do this professionally look like Tumblr fanfiction writers. You should probably take into consideration what they're saying.
Oh, definitely. And also, I'd say it comes down to humility. And when a big advantage that a lot of the independent scene has had, that unfortunately, because of the way film production works, they're at a disadvantage with. Although, and also the way a lot of comic companies work, and just a lot of companies in general, is you have this ivory wall, not an ivory tower, an ivory wall that is the dividing line between the creators and the audience. But when you look at the independent comic scene, the independent tabletop scene, the independent video game scene, so on and so on, that wall is certainly there, but it's a whole lot thinner. And there's holes in it where people can actually talk to each other. How many times have we seen it where a given creator will do live streams with their audience, or are more open to talking with, I don't know, Lolo me, for just to put myself on a pedestal on that front, we'll have a means to do open feedback. Whether or not that feedback is actually utilized is a different matter entirely. And YouTube audiences and creators are another example of this. You have a much closer and much less distant relationship, and a lot of people who are working for, say, the big two don't have the capacity to understand that relationship. And furthermore, it seems to be incentivized to not have that relationship. Because I'd imagine that the main way that they can get themselves noticed is by being antagonistic towards the people who are supposed to be buying their shit. A very counterproductive business model, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And besides, I remember my mentor once saying, "You don't get paid in exposure; you die of exposure." But if there's one thing I want to highlight with this sort of thing, is that this particular gap is one that can be bridged. But if it gets bridged, it will not happen by the big two unless they are willing to take their humility, because I'd say a lot of the best creators currently in any given market are the ones who have a degree of humility. They are very well aware that they live and die based on their audience, and while some people take this as, we've got to bend over backwards to please people who hate us. That's not the case. It's more that you have to have an understanding that you are not the big swinging dick. And I think that's the reason why this whole trend of a lot of the talented writers and creators jumping ship and deciding to go indie, that's going to keep happening. And as that keeps happening, the pool that the big two can draw from, they're going to have less and less of an incentive, because consider this: if you were a writer who specialized in sequential art, what real incentive do you have to write for the big two, or to write film for the big two?
Can't think of much, honestly.
Yeah, that's I don't know, actually. I don't think you really. I guess maybe you could work your way up and be a film director, screenwriter, maybe. Maybe I'm saying maybe with a big asterisk.
Yeah, in that case, your incentive is the promise of something, and that's not exactly strong. I mean, is there the possibility of making I guess how should I put this? You have the best that could be said is having that you worked on a popular IP on your resume, but even that's not. But things are bad when that's the best case I can make.
Yeah.
Because you can't use the money argument, because if you're working in Marvel or DC Comics, you're making peanuts. Especially if you have to be talked into moving to New York or LA, where you might be making a fair amount of money, but you're going to be spending a lot of it because of how expensive it is to live in those places.
Yeah, absolutely.
And plus I can say, I don't know about the rest of you, but I can safely say that I would not have any desire to work in a place where I'd have the sword of Damocles hanging over my head.
I just don't think I would want to work for the big two in general, just from what I've heard other people say about the working environment. I would rather just be able to write my own stories, regardless of, check boxes and workplace culture or workplace politics. Walking on eggshells all the time. Like, just let me do my art, or let me do my writing. Like, I'm here to create stories. I'm not here to create propaganda.
And given because of all that, and because of all the baggage, and the fact that people have to specifically direct order comics. There's one other factor that I'd say is a big issue in terms of this whole bridging the gap issue, and that is value for your money. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Doku, how much on average would you say a single issue of, let's go with Astonishing X-Men, would cost?
Oh, you're looking $5 to $6.
$5 to $6. And excluding advertisements, how many pages of actual content are you getting?
You know what? I'll give you an accurate number here. Give me just a brief second. Let's see. Oh, that's Oz Effect. I don't want to pull that one out. Hold on.
Yeah, you've got to go out and go and break out something from the long box.
Okay, here we go. $4.99. This is Death of X. This is number 4 variant cover. When was this printed? Oh, it's a variant cover. They don't actually put the date on the damn thing. Number 4 variant edition, Death of X. I'll just go ahead and crack this bad boy open. So you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 as a splash page, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 pages of content.
25 pages of content for about $5.99.
Yep.
Okay. Now compare that to an average volume of a given manga. Since these volumes tend to be small, I'll go with the smaller end of the volumes, and let's say a volume of Dragon Ball Z, or even Demon Slayer. Now, obviously, I'm not going to have you go through all the pages, but if I'm not mistaken, the average cost for a volume of a manga is around $10. And you typically have about, I'd say, around like 100 or so pages, 50 to 100 pages worth of content.
Depending on the size, I mean, if you're going with like the episodic stuff that you might expect to be printed in a magazine, you're looking at least double of what you're going to get in terms of content, because you have to realize with US comics, you're getting a lot of art, but you're not necessarily getting a lot of writing. The content in manga is usually much more condensed. Mm-hmm. So, an equal comparison, if you're looking at, say, one issue of, say, like Dragon Ball Z or One Piece or something out of Shonen Jump.
I'm not referring to out of Shonen Jump. I'm referring to the volumes, because that's how people are typically going to buy it.
Out of volumes equivalent content, you're getting probably about 50 to 100 pages for roughly twice the cost. So you're getting at least double of what you're normally paying for as far as American comics deliver, at least.
Yeah, that's what I'm going with this. That even though the price is at a higher amount, you're getting a lot more out of it.
And that's the thing. It's not often that you'll see a big splash page in manga. When you do, it's usually very intricate, and it's usually only reserved for specific scenes. But if you just look at the writing that goes into your typical manga versus your typical whatever X-Men, just the writing that goes into it, you're getting a lot more context. It actually reads more like a light novel than it does an actual comic book. It's usually not, by comparison, it's not light reading. Like you don't read a manga in 5 minutes, but you can read a Marvel comic book in 5 minutes, no problem.
That still ends up tying to my point. One of them having a greater amount of value relative to its cost.
Oh yeah, no, you're not wrong. when it comes to a bang for the buck, so to speak, you're definitely getting much more value out of a manga than you are your modern comic book, Marvel or DC.
Hmm.
Like, I mean, that when it comes to that argument, there is just no disputing it.
And I know,
Like, you can,
I know some people are going to be, I know some people are going to be tempted to bring up the trade paperbacks, but to be quite honest, relatively speaking, I find trade paperbacks to be overpriced.
I mean, even with the trade paperbacks, if you go by the, because usually those are at least part of an entire story arc, which is not what a volume in one manga is going to be. Normally, a manga story arc is going to be at least 2, but usually between 4 to 6 volumes before you actually really finish that story arc. And if you just go word by word, just go by word count, you're still getting 50% to 200% more content, story arc to story arc, out of a manga than you are a Western comic book.
Hmm.
Although I guess you could also attribute that to manga is viewed as it's a cultural thing between the East and the West. Manga is viewed as a more legitimate form of literature in the East than comic books are in the West. It's a stigma.
Which is all the more amusing to me, given the pop culture presence of cape shit.
Mm-hmm.
You would think with people having some form of Marvel or DC merch on T-shirts or the like all over the fucking place, that stigma wouldn't be as much of an issue, and yet it is.
And I don't know if nowadays it's necessarily. I don't know if it would be fair to call it a stigma at this point, as I think it's more because it has been a stigma for such a long time. Western comic creators think that they can continue to try to produce the same product or put it out there, and they're going to compete with something like manga, where it's like, nah, your audience kind of wants a little bit more, because guess what? The majority of people buying comic books aren't kids. We kind of expect a more sophisticated, more dense, more condensed story. We're not looking for, simplistic, K through 12 level writing. We're looking for like a legitimate story. And but I believe that creators think they can get away with it because that bar has been set for so long at that level that there's no motivation to actually try to go above it. And if you do, the rest of the industry kind of views you as a tryhard, and you get lambasted over it.
Of course, that's the other problem. The whole lobsters in a not crabs in a bucket thing.
Yep, perfect analogy. And again, that's an industry problem, though. If everybody else is being lazy, then it's easy to go ahead and be lazy and just accept your paycheck because that's where the bar is set. But as soon as you actually go and again try to make something that's a little more sophisticated or even just a little more thought out or a little more condensed, it's something that actually might be worth $5 or $6, you start getting funny looks in the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're upsetting the status quo. Sorry, shit.
Don't rock the boat.
Yep. Yep. Don't rock the boat.
I find that a lot of people who have that sort of attitude prey on the natural disposition for people to be reasonable. You don't want to be unreasonable. You don't want to be difficult. You want to be a nice person, that kind of thing. But the sweet irony with that sort of thing is you look at the people who really made names for themselves during the 90s. They were the exact opposite of that, and I'm specifically referring to the founders of Image. Even as much of a fucking idiot as Rob Liefeld is. And yes, I do feel like a certain section of hell is frozen over since Rob Liefeld is starting to become more and more reasonable in the last few years. I still don't take back all the stuff I said about him when it came to his comics, but at the very least, with everything else these days, he seems to be at least having a head on his shoulders. I don't know. Maybe sobriety does wonders for people.
Bad comic maker, but decent human being.
Mm-hmm. And I know some people point out about how he flew off the handle about one of his characters being revealed to be gay. The actual context with that is that he didn't like the fact that that was never cleared by him. You know, he along with a lot of the other Image guys are very big on creators owning their own work.
That was why Image was the kind of formed in the first place, really.
Yeah, they did. The people who were founding Image didn't like the fact that they either were seen as expendable to the higher ups, or they were in charge of writing other people's stuff. But when it comes to the thing is, a lot of the greats in any creative medium don't become great by being reasonable. They usually are the people that end up having those big impacts, those big game changers, are the ones who decide to rock the damn boat.
Look back to the aforementioned Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore.
Mm-hmm. Even if I think Alan Moore is an asshole, I won't deny his talents.
Yeah.
And I think those people, because of the fact that they want to do their own thing, are inevitably going to shift to the indies. And
That actually touches on something I wanted to say, but sorry, go ahead, Mildred.
And the people who want to be part of a collective are going to be the people who are the pickings for the big two.
Well, you're not wrong, and in that sense, a lot of the writers that actually take what they do seriously, whether you're going to be a novelist or a graphic artist or even just a comic book writer, the ones that do take their work to that higher level, they don't just want to tout the status quo no matter how low the bar is set. They're the ones that actually go ahead and do start their own projects, because as easy as it would be to work inside an already established continuity with already recognizable and well-known characters just to kind of get your name out there, eventually you do want to make your own characters, create your own story, and work within your own set of parameters, your own set of rules, as opposed to just working on something that somebody else created several decades ago. Which is why you see a lot of the good writers moving towards indie projects, and all the writers working for the big two, despite how recognizable and how well established the characters and franchises are, keep falling flat, is because they not only are they just regurgitating half-assed stories, they don't pay attention to any of the established continuity anyways, and they hate the fan base because the fan base actually knows the continuity better than they do because they're too lazy to go ahead and read up on it. And then when they get called out for nonsensical bullshit that doesn't make any sense, they go ahead and attack the fans. It's like, well, I'm the writer. If you don't like it, go make your own. That's what you did, except you just co-opted something that was already established and decided to toss it by the wayside. As Shades brought up earlier, Doctor Who.
Well, that and when people do decide to make their own, they try and go sue Happy to see if they can get it from being unmade because they can't compete.
Oh no, that's a whole nother. You want to talk about toxicity? That is a whole nother level of. At that point in time, it's just you're just being salty and jealous over somebody else's success. But that's a different topic. That's a rabbit hole I'm not going to go down.
Yeah, right.
Like everybody talks about reducing toxicity in fandoms. That I say that you want toxicity. There's where it really is.
Oh yeah, no, it's not the fandom that you need to be worried about. It's the quote unquote creators that are working in these mediums that are the really toxic ones.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously they're.
I'd say about half of the people who have me banned, who have me banned or blocked, count under that category.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. Like I said, it's the same people that put themselves on a pedestal, like, well, your opinion doesn't matter. I'm the writer. I'm the creator.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to like it. Don't buy it. Okay, we won't. We'll go make our own. How dare you do this? It's like, yeah, hate to break it to you guys. It's not us that are the problem. It's you.
The message is, you are not. No one is owed allegiance.
Oh, dude, like I said, I've been an avid comic book fan for a long time, but I can't tell you the last time I actually walked into my local comic shop because there's nothing being produced that I want to spend my money on.
Mm-hmm. And
it's not even just that the writing is bad. The last Marvel comic I bought, as soon as I opened the page, the ink ran on my fingers, and I flipped the page, not vigorously or anything, just casual, normal flip of the page, and it fucking tore. Why the hell am I paying $6 for that? Like, that's just unacceptable.
Nice covers half the time.
Oh, it was bad. It was actually the cover ink that ran on my fingers, and the page, literally the first page, tore as soon as I turned it. Because it was that thin.
And of course, I'd say that's a case of cheaping out on the printing press.
Oh, it definitely was, because that's how bad their sales were doing at the time. I mean, this was back towards the end of the all new, all different Marvel run. There were still a few things out that were kind of decent. But even the decent stories, it was just the quality of the product itself, like the thickness of the paper.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel the paper is like newspaper thin.
Is it? I have to ask this: was it as thin as Bible pages?
Getting pretty close.
That's not exactly what I would call flattering.
It was, the cover was fine, aside from the ink running. It was once you got into the actual book and you realized, I don't even want to touch this thing because I feel like it's going to fall apart in my hands. You could tell they were cutting corners. It sure as hell. Okay, I'll put it to you this way: it was about the same quality as a comic book you would get on Free Comic Book Day, but for $6.
I hope you kept the receipt.
Oh, I did. Yes, I did, and I returned it.
I don't think it. Did they try and pull some "we can't take it because it's damaged" shit?
No, because I actually knew the local comic shop owners, and they were well aware of the games that Marvel was playing at the time, so they accepted it. Mm-hmm. Which I feel bad for them because obviously Marvel wasn't refunding them squat at the time. So I'm just shocked that that comic shop managed to stay open, to be perfectly blunt.
Yeah. But even with that, I wouldn't be surprised if there's any case of bridging the gap. It's in the fact that I'd say people are looking into looking into the big examples in the indie comic scene, whether it be something like Jawbreakers or something like Cyberfrog, and then through digging into that and the fact that they're shouting other people out, are learning about other comics. And that's the bridge that is going to get made. And I think that's an excellent coda for this particular adventure. The MCU had a position where they could have started to bridge the gap, but that position is long since passed. And if they think that they're going to get endgame money from anything in Phase 4, then I got a bridge I'd like to sell them. A bridge over the River Kwai. And can of Coke to whoever gets that reference. But that I think is a good enough spot for this particular edition of GeekWatch. We will be back here next week with a new edition, and there's doubtless going to be a few surprises along the way. I am going to be working double time to try and catch up on the Character a Day challenge, so keep an eye on my Twitter for that. I'll hopefully have a different character each day. That's the plan, at least. And of course, now I'm still working on interviews for the month of January. I've got a few on the road, but they're going to be later in the month. And of course, next Saturday will be the return of Monastery Gazette, and next Sunday the return of GeekWatch. I can guarantee we'll be likely talking about better shit. In fact, let me check. Let me check my topic list here, and okay, we'll be talking about slightly better shit next week. Not shitty shit. At the very least, interesting shit. See, there are layers to my shitty puns.
Oh, shitty pun.
But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.